Jack had been working on the old cargo ship for what felt like days. The ship had seen better days, with hull damage from a space skirmish that had left it drifting in the quiet outskirts of a far-off sector. He was one of the few humans on the crew, and his job was to get the ship back into working order, a task that never seemed to end. It had been a slow and tedious process, filled with hours of repairing the external systems, reconfiguring broken circuits, and trying to keep the ship from falling apart. The hum of the ship's generator was the only constant sound as Jack worked. He didn't mind the silence, it was a familiar companion in his job. He focused on his tools, sweat beading on his forehead as he tightened a panel dot as Jack worked. He noticed movement from the corner of his eye. Looking up, he saw a new face approaching, a woman. Not just any woman, a tall, alien woman with sleek black armor and a confident stride. Her name was Arya, a warrior from a distant planet. Jack had heard the rumors about her, stories of her strength and bravery, of battles won and enemies crushed. But he hadn't expected to meet her like this. Arya was no stranger to war. Her race had fought in many battles, and her reputation had preceded her. She wore a suit of armor that covered most of her body, leaving only her face exposed. She didn't look like someone who would spend her time fixing ships, yet here she was, offering to help with the repairs. Jack wasn't sure if he should accept. He had been working alone for so long and didn't want to risk getting distracted. But the ship was large, and he was only one person. He reluctantly nodded and motioned for her to join him. She walked over to his workbench, her armor clicking with every step. Jack glanced at her, still uncertain about what to expect. She didn't seem like the type to sit quietly and follow orders. Instead, she looked ready to take control of the situation, her eyes scanning the room with a sharp focus. "I'm here to help," Arya said, her voice deep but steady. "Where do we begin?" Jack pointed to the broken engine panel in front of him. "We need to get the core back online, but the wiring's all messed up. I was hoping you could help me sort it out." Arya nodded without hesitation and set to work. Her hands moved quickly and precisely as she examined the panel. Jack watched, impressed by her efficiency, even though she wore the heavy armor. Her movements were fluid, almost graceful. She seemed to know exactly what she was doing, and Jack found himself slowly loosening his grip on his tools as he allowed her to take the lead. For a while, the only sounds in the room were the clinks of metal tools and the soft hum of the ship's power systems. Jack had been so used to working alone that he found it strange to have someone beside him. But Arya was different. She didn't speak much, but her presence was enough to fill the silence. Her focus was on the task at hand, her entire attention directed at fixing the ship. It wasn't long before Jack noticed something odd. Arya's armor, which had seemed so solid and unmovable at first, began to shift slightly as she worked. It was as if she was uncomfortable in it. She adjusted the shoulder guards, the chest plate, and the wrist braces every so often, as if they were too tight, or perhaps simply cumbersome for the work she was doing. Jack raised an eyebrow. It was hard to imagine someone like Arya feeling awkward in anything, let alone an armor designed for battle. Curiosity started to take over. Jack had always heard that Arya was a fierce fighter, but the more he observed, the more he realized that there was more to her than just strength. She wasn't just the warrior she appeared to be. There was a side of her that Jack was beginning to notice, the quiet determination in her actions, the precision in her movements, and the way she focused on fixing the ship as though it were as important as any battle she had fought. "Do you need a hand?" Jack asked, breaking the silence. Arya paused, looking over at him. "I've got it," she replied, her voice calm but firm. She didn't seem to mind working alone. But Jack noticed that she didn't push him away. She seemed to welcome the help, even if she didn't say it out loud. Jack returned to his own work, his mind wandering. There was something about Arya that intrigued him. She was tough, no doubt, but there was more to her. He couldn't help but wonder what she was really like when she wasn't wearing the heavy armor that shielded her from the world. What was it like to be Arya, the warrior, without the armor? He had only seen her as a fighter, But now he was starting to see the person beneath the armor. As he continued working, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of something. There was a strange tension in the air, something unspoken between him and Arya. He wasn't sure what it was yet, but he was starting to realize that the repair wasn't the only thing they were fixing. The ship's engine room was quiet again, save for the hum of the power systems and the occasional clink of tools being moved. Jack had grown accustomed to the rhythm of the repairs. Yet something had changed since Arya had arrived. Her presence, strong yet subtle, filled the space. At first, Jack had simply thought she was another warrior, here to help get the job done. But now, as he worked alongside her, he began to realize that she was much more than that. Arya moved with the same precision as before, but Jack couldn't help noticing the slight discomfort in her movements. She adjusted her armor frequently, trying to make herself more comfortable as they worked. The armor she wore was heavy, built for battle, not for tasks like ship repairs. Jack had heard that warriors from her planet were known for their strength, but seeing her struggle with the weight of her own gear made him wonder about the kind of life she led. As Arya paused to check a tool, Jack caught her rubbing her shoulder. Under the armor, her eyes closed for a moment in quiet relief. He watched, unsure if he should say something. Finally, he spoke. "Is your armor bothering you?" he asked gently, trying not to sound too intrusive. Arya looked up, surprised by the question. For a moment, there was a pause before she gave a small, half smile. "It's fine. It's just not ideal for this kind of work," she admitted, her voice steady but with a hint of vulnerability. "I'm used to it during combat, but this is different." Jack nodded, understanding her discomfort. He had worked in heavy machinery before, and while it didn't compare to wearing full combat armor, he could imagine how it would be difficult to focus while wearing such a cumbersome suit. But he was also beginning to sense something more, something behind the armor. They continued to work in silence, each absorbed in their tasks. But Jack's thoughts kept drifting back to Arya. He had never met anyone like her before. She was strong, yes, but there was something more beneath the surface, something fragile, almost human, that she seemed to keep hidden beneath the layers of her armor. The hours passed, and the ship slowly began to come back to life. The power systems flickered back on, the engine hum grew steadier, and the hull repairs were nearly complete. But Jack noticed that Arya's focus seemed to waver more frequently. She was constantly shifting in place, her hand rubbing at her side where the armor dug into her skin. After a while, Jack couldn't stand it anymore. He set down his tools and turned to face her. "Why don't you take a break?" he suggested, his voice kind but firm. "You've been working hard, and you look like you could use a rest." Arya glanced at him, eyes narrowing for a moment, as if unsure how to respond. But then, with a sigh, she removed her helmet and set it on the workbench. The sight of her without the heavy headgear surprised Jack. She looked different, more vulnerable. Without the armor, she appeared almost human. Her face, still youthful, but marked by the hard years of war, softened slightly. "You're right," she said quietly, her tone a little less guarded. "I suppose I could use a break." She sat down on the crate nearby, her eyes closing for a moment as she leaned back, letting out a long breath. Jack was still watching her, though he tried not to stare. There was something about the way she carried herself, even without the armor, that still commanded respect. But now, it was more than that. It wasn't just her physical strength that he admired. It was something deeper, her resilience, her quiet strength. Arya caught him looking and met his gaze. For a moment, neither of them spoke, and an unspoken understanding seemed to pass between them. Jack didn't know what it was, but there was something in the air, something that made him realize he was seeing Arya for who she really was, not just as the warrior in armor. "You don't have to stare," Arya said with a small smirk, clearly aware of his gaze. Jack blinked, feeling a flush creep up his neck. "Sorry, I didn't mean to. I just never seen you without the armor. It's different." She chuckled softly. "Yeah, I don't get many chances to let it down." Her voice was lighter now, more relaxed. "It's not easy, pretending to be something I'm not." Jack sat down across from her, resting on a nearby bench. He could feel the shift in the air between them. There was something honest in her words, something that made him want to ask more. But instead, he just nodded. "I get it," he said. "We all have parts of ourselves we don't show." For a moment, the two of them sat in silence, the steady hum of the ship's systems filling the space around them. It wasn't uncomfortable silence, just quiet. The kind that comes when two people are comfortable enough to be themselves. "So, tell me about you, Jack," Arya said, breaking the silence. "You've been quiet the whole time we've worked together. What's your story?" Jack smiled softly. "Not much to tell, really. Just a guy who fixes ships, keeps things running. Nothing too exciting." Arya raised an eyebrow. "That doesn't sound too bad. Seems like you're good at it." Jack shrugged, a little embarrassed by the compliment. "I try my best." Arya nodded, her eyes studying him for a moment. She seemed to weigh her next words carefully, but before she could speak, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Their brief moment of quiet connection was interrupted as the rest of the crew approached, ready to inspect the work they had done. But as they turned their attention to the repairs, Jack couldn't help but wonder about the real Arya without the armor, without the title of warrior. Just a person, like him. The repair work had come a long way, but there was still much to be done. The hum of the ship's power system was now steady, and the engine had come back to life. Yet, despite the progress, Jack couldn't stop thinking about the way things had shifted between him and Arya. She wasn't just the warrior who had arrived to help him fix his ship. She was someone more, a person with her own struggles, her own story. The hours had passed quickly, and now the crew had gathered in the main chamber to review the work. Jack stood off to the side, his hands wiping the grease from his clothes, looking over the team as they inspected the progress. But his mind wasn't on the ship or the repairs. It was on Arya. She had finished helping with the repairs, but she hadn't left yet. Instead, she leaned against the wall near him, arms folded, her eyes scanning the group. Jack had noticed that she didn't often show much emotion, always keeping her thoughts guarded. But as she stood there, her eyes softened, almost as if she were lost in thought. Jack decided to break the silence. He couldn't help it. "You seem a bit distant today," he said, glancing at her. Arya's eyes met his, and for a moment, they stayed like that, locked in quiet understanding. "Just thinking," she replied quietly, "about how things change." Jack raised an eyebrow, unsure what she meant. "Change?" Arya nodded, her gaze shifting back to the group. "When you've been in battle for so long, everything becomes about fighting, about winning. But here, fixing a ship, working together with people who aren't fighting. It's strange." Jack smiled a little, appreciating her honesty. "It's different from what you're used to, I guess. But it's not so bad, is it?" She glanced at him, her lips curling into a faint smile. "No, it's not, just different." There was something in her eyes, a flicker of uncertainty, that Jack couldn't quite place. Arya was always so confident, so sure of herself when she wore the armor. But now, without it, she seemed more human. She seemed vulnerable. "I've been meaning to ask you something," Jack said, trying to ease the tension. "What made you leave your planet, to come here, to help?" Arya hesitated for a moment, her eyes drifting to the floor. "I didn't leave my planet on my own terms," she replied slowly. "I was sent here on a mission, like many of us. But after the battle, after everything, I started to question things. I didn't want to fight anymore." Jack listened, his gaze softening. He had always admired the warriors of Arya's species, but hearing her speak about her own doubts made him realize that even the strongest people had their own struggles. "That must have been hard," he said quietly. "It was," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's still hard. I don't know where I belong anymore." There was a long pause, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Jack could feel the weight of her words, the vulnerability she was showing him. He knew it wasn't easy for someone like Arya to let down her guard, to show her true feelings. But here she was, doing just that. "I don't know where I belong either," Jack said after a while. "I've been fixing ships my whole life. It's what I do. But It doesn't always feel like it's enough, sometimes. I wonder if there's more to life than just keeping things running. Arya turned to him, her eyes meeting his with a quiet understanding. I think we all wonder that at some point. Jack nodded, feeling a strange sense of connection with her. Despite their different backgrounds, their different worlds, they both shared the same question. What came after the fight, after the repair, after the work was done, as the rest of the crew finished their inspections? The room began to clear out. The work wasn't over, but for the moment, they had done enough. Jack and Arya remained behind, standing in the quiet of the engine room, their thoughts lingering in the silence. Do you ever think about what comes next? Jack asked, his voice low. Arya looked at him for a moment before answering. Sometimes. But I don't know if I'll ever have an answer. Maybe we're not meant to know. Jack stared at her, his mind racing. There was so much about her that he still didn't understand. So much about himself he didn't understand. But in that moment, with the quiet of the ship surrounding them, he felt a strange sense of peace. For once, the questions didn't need answers. Maybe it was enough just to be here, in the moment, with someone who understood. As Arya began to turn away, ready to leave, Jack caught her arm gently. She looked at him in surprise, and for a moment, there was a brief pause. Thank you, he said quietly, for helping, for being here. Arya's eyes softened, and she gave him a small nod. I'm not the one who deserves thanks. We all help in our own way. She turned to walk away. But Jack felt something shift in him. He didn't know what it was yet, but he knew one thing for sure. The ship wasn't the only thing that was being repaired. The ship had finally started to feel like home again. The repairs were nearly complete, and the crew, though tired, had a sense of accomplishment. The hum of the engines now filled the air, a steady sound that felt like a heartbeat. Jack couldn't help but feel a small sense of pride as he walked through the ship, checking the last few systems. Everything was running smoothly, and the danger had passed. It was time to move on. But as Jack worked, he noticed something odd. Arya, who had been a constant presence during the repairs, hadn't been herself lately. She was still working hard, but her usual quiet strength seemed to be replaced by something else, something Jack couldn't quite place. She wasn't speaking as much, and when she did, her voice was distant, like she was somewhere far away in her own mind. Jack found himself worrying about her. She was always so composed, so strong. But now, she seemed different, distant, lost in thought. He decided that if she wasn't going to speak about it, maybe he could find a way to help. Later that day, as the crew finished up their work and the ship began its slow journey toward the nearest station for repairs, Jack found Arya alone in the quiet of the cargo bay. She was sitting on a crate, her legs drawn up to her chest, staring out the large viewport into the endless stretch of space. The stars twinkled, distant and cold. Arya, Jack called softly, walking over to her. She didn't immediately turn to face him, but he could see the way her shoulders tensed, as if she were holding something back. You're still up here, Jack continued, keeping his voice gentle. Everything's running fine. We've done all we can. I know, Arya replied, her voice soft and distant. She finally turned to look at him, but her gaze seemed unfocused, as if she wasn't truly seeing him. But it doesn't feel like it's enough, Jack. Jack sat down beside her, careful not to crowd her, giving her space. What do you mean? She sighed, running a hand through her hair, pushing it back from her face. I don't know. It just... everything feels like it's moving forward, and I'm still stuck. I came here to fight, to do what I was trained to do. But now that the fighting is over, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I'm good at being a warrior, Jack. But when there's no fight, who am I? Jack listened carefully, his eyes softening. He could feel the weight of her words. It was clear she was struggling with something. But what? She had always been so strong, so sure of herself. To hear her speak like this was unexpected. You've been fighting for so long, Jack said slowly. Maybe it's hard to imagine doing something else, but you're not alone, Arya. You don't have to be the warrior every minute of every day. Arya looked at him then, her eyes wide. almost searching. What do you mean? I mean, maybe it's okay to just be yourself. You're not just a soldier, you're more than that, Jack said, his voice firm but kind. And maybe the real strength comes from being vulnerable, from taking off the armor. Even if just for a moment, Arya's gaze shifted down to her hands, and Jack could see the quiet battle taking place in her mind. I don't know if I can. I've spent so long hiding behind the armor, behind the title of warrior. Without that, I don't know who I am. Jack paused, considering his next words. You're still you, Arya, no matter what you wear. And even if you don't have all the answers now, it's okay. You're allowed to figure it out. For a long moment, Arya didn't say anything. The silence between them was comfortable. Though thick with unspoken thoughts, Jack stayed close, waiting for her to speak, knowing that sometimes just being there was enough. Finally, Arya spoke again, her voice softer than before. I never thought I'd hear those words from you, Jack. Smiled gently. I guess we all need a reminder sometimes. We're all just trying to find our way. Arya looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in days. You're right, she said quietly. Maybe I've been too focused on the wrong things. Jack nodded. Sometimes the answer isn't in fighting. Sometimes it's in letting go and finding peace. Arya took a deep breath, her shoulders finally relaxing as she looked back out at the stars. I think I can try. I think I need to. Jack smiled, relieved to see a flicker of her old strength return. You're not alone in this. We're all here. For a while, neither of them spoke. The quiet of the cargo bay, the distant hum of the ship, and the stars outside created a peaceful backdrop for their conversation. It was a moment of clarity for both of them, Jack realizing that strength didn't always mean fighting, and Arya beginning to accept that it was okay to be vulnerable, to stop hiding behind her armor. As they sat together, the sound of footsteps approaching signaled the return of the rest of the crew. The moment was over, but the shift in their relationship had been made. Jack and Arya had connected on a deeper level, and for the first time in a long while, Arya felt like she might just have a chance to figure out who she was beyond the warrior. The repairs were done. The fight was over. But the real work of finding peace, of finding themselves, was just beginning. The days after their conversation were quiet, but Jack could tell that something had shifted between him and Arya. She seemed different, more present, more aware of herself. It wasn't that she had suddenly changed overnight, but there was a subtle shift in her. She no longer carried the weight of her armor as she had before. The air between them was lighter now, as though they had both stepped into a new chapter of their journey. The ship was still on its way to the station, and the crew had a few days of calm before they would be called into action again. Jack had always preferred these quiet moments, the ones when there were no immediate threats, no urgent repairs. It was during these moments that he could breathe and think clearly. But even now, as he worked on the last few touches of the ship, his thoughts kept drifting back to Arya. He found her outside the engine room one evening, sitting on a crate, looking out through the viewport. The stars were scattered across the sky, their faint light shimmering in the blackness of space. It was a peaceful scene, one that seemed to bring a sense of calm to anyone who took the time to really see it. Arya wasn't looking at the stars, though. Her gaze was far off, lost in her thoughts. Jack hesitated for a moment, wondering if he should approach, but then he decided he would. The silence between them had grown comfortable, but he couldn't help but feel the need to check in on her. He wasn't sure if she needed space or if she needed company, but he felt that now was the right time to ask. He stepped closer and sat down next to her, careful not to disturb her too suddenly. You okay? Jack asked, his voice gentle but sincere. Arya didn't look at him immediately, but after a few seconds, she turned to face him. Her expression was softer than usual, but there was still something deep in her eyes that told him she was thinking hard about something. I think I'm getting there, she said quietly. I've been thinking a lot lately about what you said. Jack smiled. About the armor, she nodded. Yeah, it's not easy to just let it go. I've spent my whole life with it, fighting, surviving, always being the warrior. I didn't know who I was without it. Jack didn't speak right away. He understood her struggle more than he had let on. He had spent years keeping to himself, never letting anyone in, always focused on the work. But Arya's journey felt different. She wasn't just shedding physical armor, she was trying to find out who she was without the identity she had built around herself. It was something Jack respected deeply, I think. You're figuring it out, Jack said softly, and that's okay. We all have to find who we are without the things we hide behind. You don't need to have all the answers yet, Arya smiled, though it was a small one. It's just hard, to think that there's more to me than just fighting. I've never had time to think about anything else. I understand, Jack replied. But what if there's more to you than you realize? What if this is just the beginning of something different? Arya looked at him for a long moment. As though searching his face for sincerity, she seemed to find it, and her expression softened even more. Maybe, she whispered. Maybe there is. They both sat in silence for a while, the stars outside still as beautiful as ever. The quiet was comforting, but Jack could feel the shift in Arya. She was beginning to realize that there was more to her than she had ever allowed herself to see, and that realization, Jack knew, was powerful. I've never had someone remind me of that, Arya said finally, breaking the silence. You've helped me see things differently, Jack. It's strange, but it feels right. Jack turned to face her, his voice steady. It's not strange, Arya. We all need someone to help us find the answers. It doesn't mean we're weak. It means we're human. She nodded slowly, taking in his words. For the first time since they had met, Jack saw Arya's eyes soften in a way that wasn't guarded or distant. She looked more at peace, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. It was a beautiful thing to witness. I thought I came here to fix the ship, Arya said with a small laugh. But I think I came here to fix myself. Jack smiled, happy to see her in a better place. Well, sometimes the repair isn't just about the ship. Sometimes it's about us. They both stood up, and for the first time in a long while, there was no tension between them, just two people standing side by side. Not as warrior and engineer, but as people who had learned from each other. There was a mutual respect in the air now, and an unspoken understanding that they didn't need to have everything figured out to move forward. Thanks for being here, Jack, Arya said quietly, her voice full of gratitude. For helping me, Jack nodded, his expression sincere. Anytime, Arya. We're all just trying to find our way. With that, they turned and walked back toward the main part of the ship. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but Jack knew that whatever came next, they were both ready for it. They had faced their fears, their doubts, and in doing so, had found a new kind of strength. And that was something no armor could ever replace. The days continued to pass, and the ship was now running smoothly, its systems all repaired and ready for the next part of the journey. But despite the ship's quiet hum and the crew's efficient work, Jack couldn't help but feel that something had shifted, something bigger than just the repairs. Arya's transformation had become more evident with each passing day. She was no longer just the tough warrior who had come to help with the repairs. She had begun to open up, to embrace the idea that she was more than the roles she had always played. As the ship made its way through space, Jack noticed that Arya was no longer trying to hide behind her armor. She still wore it when needed, but there was a difference now. It wasn't a shield. It wasn't something that defined her. It was just part of her, a tool, no longer something that defined her entire being. One evening, as they gathered for a break in the crew lounge, Jack and Arya sat together at a small table. The rest of the crew was scattered around the room, talking and relaxing. But the two of them were quieter, as they often were. Arya had her helmet off, and Jack noticed how much more at ease she seemed without it. She wasn't just the warrior anymore. She was Arya the person. Do you ever miss it? Jack asked, breaking the comfortable silence between them. He was referring to her past life as a soldier. The battles, the constant fighting. Miss the battle? Arya looked at him for a moment, her expression thoughtful. Sometimes, I miss the certainty of it, I guess. In battle, You know what's expected of you. There's always something to fight for. But out here, she gestured around the lounge. It's different. There's no clear fight, no enemy. It's a little quieter, but in a way, I think. I like it. Jack nodded. I get that. It's like when you've been working on something for so long. You forget what it's like to just stop and breathe. Arya's lips curled into a small smile. Exactly. I'm learning to breathe again. They both fell silent, enjoying the peaceful moment. It wasn't often that they had the chance to just sit and think without the constant pressure of their tasks weighing down on them. But here, in this quiet corner of the ship, it felt like they could both take a breath and let the world slow down for just a little while. As the crew continued to chat and laugh around them, Jack noticed that Arya wasn't looking at them in the same way she had before. She wasn't keeping to herself, hiding in the shadows. Instead, she seemed to be watching them with a quiet curiosity, her gaze soft and contemplative. It was as though she was beginning to see people for who they truly were, not just for the roles they played. Do you ever wonder what it's like to just live? Arya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack looked at her, surprised by the question. Live, yeah, she said, her eyes distant. Just live. Not as a soldier or a fixer or anything else, just as a person. Not worrying about battles or repairs, just living. Jack smiled softly. I think we all want that sometimes, to just live without all the weight on you. Our shoulders. Arya nodded, her gaze shifting back to the group of crew members. I don't think I've ever truly lived. Not until now. Jack's heart stirred at her words. He realized that this was a turning point for Arya. She wasn't just shedding her armor. She was shedding the person she had been forced to be. She was learning to live for herself, not for others, not for some mission or title. And that, Jack realized, was the most powerful change of all. The conversation drifted into other topics, but Jack couldn't stop thinking about Arya's words. She had always been so focused on the fight, on the survival. But now, she was beginning to understand that survival wasn't the same as living. Living meant embracing everything, the quiet moments, the small joys, the relationships. And Arya was starting to learn how to do that. As the evening wore on, Jack and Arya stood up to leave. The other crew members were heading to their stations, or to their quarters, but there was still a sense of calm between them. The journey ahead was still uncertain. There would be more work to do, more challenges to face. But Jack didn't feel the same pressure he once did. He felt lighter, more at peace, and he knew that Arya felt it too. I'm glad you're here, Arya, Jack said as they walked down the hallway toward their respective rooms. I know it hasn't been easy, but I think you're finding your way. Arya glanced at him, her eyes soft with gratitude. I don't think I could have done it without you. You've helped me see things differently, not just about the ship or the mission, but about myself. Jack smiled, relieved to hear her say it. He had always known that she was strong, but it was nice to hear her say it out loud. You don't need to thank me, Jack said. You were always capable of this. I just reminded you that it was there. Arya gave him a look, her smile returning. Maybe, but sometimes it helps to have someone else remind you of what you're capable of. They walked in silence for a few moments, the sound of their footsteps echoing softly in the quiet hallway. And for the first time since they had met, Jack felt like they weren't just crew members on a ship, they were friends, walking together towards something new, something better. The journey wasn't over, but Jack felt hopeful. Arya had started to shed the weight of her past, and she was beginning to live for herself. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of something even greater than they could have imagined. The ship was moving through deep space now, and there was a strange sense of calm among the crew. The journey had been long, filled with repairs, battles, and uncertainty, but now there was a quiet peace. The ship hummed steadily, a sound that felt like a heartbeat. Steady and constant. Jack stood in the control room, looking out at the endless void of space. The stars stretched out before him, beautiful and distant. The crew had completed all the necessary repairs, and now the ship was ready for whatever came next. There was nothing urgent, nothing immediate to focus on. for the first time in what felt like ages. There was nothing to do but wait. Arya entered the room quietly, her footsteps soft against the metal floor. Jack turned to greet her, a small smile forming on his lips. She had been different lately, more relaxed, more present. It wasn't the same Arya he had met when she first arrived. She was still strong, still capable, but now there was a new layer to her. She was more herself than she had ever been. "You're up early," Jack remarked. Raising an eyebrow, Arya smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "I couldn't sleep. Thought I'd take a walk. It's peaceful out here." Jack nodded, turning back to the viewport. "Yeah, it's nice, quiet." Arya stepped beside him, gazing out at the stars. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, it was familiar. It was the kind of silence that came when two people understood each other without words. Jack had learned to appreciate this new version of Arya. She was no longer just the warrior with a past filled with battles. She was Arya, the person. Someone who had her own hopes, fears, and dreams. "I've been thinking a lot," Arya said after a few moments, "about what you said when we first started working together, about being more than just a soldier." Jack glanced at her. "Yeah," she nodded. "I've been so focused on the fighting, on being the strong one, that I never thought about what it meant to live without it. I never thought about what it means to be someone without armor." Jack could feel the weight of her words. He knew how much Arya had struggled to let go of her past, to embrace the idea that she was more than just her title, more than just the warrior. It hadn't been easy for her, but now he could see the change in her. She was starting to understand that living didn't mean always fighting. It meant being present in the moment, embracing who you were, not what you were forced to be. "I think you've made a lot of progress," Jack said softly. "You're not the same person who arrived here." Arya looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "I didn't know who I was when I first came here. I thought I was just a soldier. But I'm starting to see that I can be more than that." Jack smiled, feeling proud of her. "You've always been more than that." She raised an eyebrow at him. "You really think so?" "I know so," Jack replied, his voice confident. "You've got more strength in you than anyone I've ever met. Not just the physical strength, but something deeper. You're not just a warrior. You're a person who can change, who can grow." Arya looked down for a moment, considering his words. She had spent so much of her life wrapped up in the idea of being a warrior, of being someone who had to always be strong, always be fighting. But now, she was starting to see that strength wasn't just about what you could do with your hands or your weapons. It was about how you could change, how you could let go of the past and move forward. "I never thought I could change," she said quietly. "I always thought I had to be the same person, the same warrior. But now, I'm not so sure. Maybe I can be someone different, someone better." Jack placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of support. "You already are. The fact that you're here, looking for something more, that's what makes you stronger. It's not about how much you fight. It's about how you live." Arya smiled, her eyes glimmering with something new. "I think I'm finally starting to understand that." They stood there together for a while, gazing out at the stars. The ship glided through space, steady and unwavering, and for the first time in a long while, Arya felt like she was moving forward. She wasn't running from her past anymore. She was ready to step into her future, whatever it might hold. As the stars continued to sparkle in the distance, Arya knew that there would be challenges ahead, that the road wouldn't always be easy. But for the first time, she felt ready to face whatever came next, ready to be herself. Jack gave her a final smile before turning to leave the control room. "We've got a long way to go, but we'll figure it out together." Arya nodded, a sense of peace settling over her. Together. And as she watched Jack walk away, she realized that she didn't need to have all the answers. She didn't need to be perfect or always know what came next. All she needed to do was keep moving forward, one step at a time. The ship, like her, was on a journey, and the future was wide open.